the vapor of your breath, the planets roll. If the stars were made to worship so high, I can see your heart in everything you have made. Every burning star will signify red ray. If creation sings your praises so loud, so loud. Say hello to a neighbor before you take a seat.
Good morning, New Life. My name is Erin, and I'm bringing you The Beat. It's so good to see all of your smiling faces out there this morning. We hear so often that what people love most about New Life Church is the amazing community of people. So if you're new or have yet to get connected, I have one job that I need you to do for me this morning. Grab that connection card on a seat next to you or nearby and give us some basic information like your name, your number, your email, and bring it to the New Here table in the lobby at the end of service. You'll get a free gift and also have an opportunity to get plugged in here. If you're online, no worries. Click the link that says New Here and an online host will connect with you. This past weekend, we were able to celebrate 5 amazing years of New Life Church. This would have never been possible without our entire dream team who steps out and uses their giftings within the church. Did you know that you can be a part of the dream team? That you, and only you, were given gifts by God that He wants you to use to grow His kingdom. Register now for Discovery on Tuesday, October 12th at New Life HQ to learn about the vision and values of NLC, but also how you were gifted by God. Dinner is provided, Jesus chicken, of course, and there's free childcare, so your children are welcome to join. Download the New Life Church app, click on events, and save your spot. Here at New Life, we are marked and known by our desire to serve the community. 2 days ago, over 40 volunteers walked in the Madawan Homecoming Parade to invite people to join us here at NLC. From kids to grandparents, there's always an opportunity to serve. Now, I'd like to enter into a time of worship through the giving of our tithes and offerings. Tithing is a form of worship because it shows God that you trust Him and not money to provide. Matthew 6:24 reminds us that we can't worship God and money at the same time. No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. When we are obedient to the tithe, we give God our first and best, the same way that by giving His Son, He gave us His first and best. There's multiple ways that you can give. If you're in person, you can use the drop boxes as you exit today, or simply give through the New Life KZoo app or on our website at newlifekzoo.com. All right, guys, it's time for our 4th message in the sermon series, Asking for a Friend.
What's up, everybody, and welcome. It is such an honor that you're here with us today. And can I just tell you, if you're checking out this church for the first time, let me introduce myself. My name is Dan Smith, and I'm the lead pastor here. And we like to do this. We are not just like family, we are family. It's all about a great community of people. And we don't just have family that are here in this room, because the church is a mission, not a monument. And so we have people that are a part of this church all over the place. We have them in Africa, and we have people who are in Honduras. We have people in Tennessee and in Florida and all over the map. And I want the church family who's in the room today to say hi to your church family online. So if you do me a favor, put your hands together. We love you guys. And we are so excited that you're along for the journey. Now, we're in this series called Asking for a Friend. And we've been talking about questions that you've asked, or your friend did anyways. So in the last couple of weeks, we started with abortion. Man, that was thank you for that. And then we went on to weed and cannabis. Last week was, does prayer work? Is prayer real? Can we change God's mind? And if you missed any of those, I highly encourage you to go check those out. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel or download the New Life app, and all of that is there for you. Well, this week, I wanted to start with kind of a joke. I woke up this morning and we're talking about the topic of creation and evolution and can they coexist? And as I was preparing for this message, there's a bunch of detail in it, and I got to go really fast. But I was sitting in my on my throne this morning, if you will, and I look over and I realize, and I've had this question for a long time, like if we're an evolved creature, highly intelligent, and we have all of this technology that's just fascinating, why are we still using this? And then I realized that this was sitting there close by, and it's called flushable wipes. And I started to think about, like, man, when I was a kid and my kids, are younger and we still use this on our youngest one, this is a baby wipe. And so we've evolved from using this to using this and now back to using this. I mean, so can we call that evolution or what? I mean, come on. But, we like to be a generous church, so who wants some free stuff? All right, there you go. You get the good stuff, Trevor. All right, who wants some TP? Woo! Way up in the back. That was almost a good catch. But the topic right today is, can creation and evolution coexist? And so I'm going to start with the creation story. And in Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so this is what we believe in as Christians, as his followers, as God's followers, that God created the heavens and the earth. Now, right after that, he said that the earth was formless and void, empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of those waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. You fast forward to Genesis 2:7, and then you get to us, humankind. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed life, the breath of life, into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Now, that's the creation story as brought to us by Genesis in the Bible that believers, that followers of Jesus believe in. That God, right, he creates Adam and then he creates Eve. They live in the garden, right, and they're enjoying each other. They're enjoying God. They're enjoying all of God's creation. They have kids, and the story continues, and here we are. But let me go to evolution theory. So I've kind of given you just a broad scope of the creation story. Now let's go to evolution. Charles Darwin in 1882, I guess a side note, Charles Darwin did not come up with the idea of evolution as I studied, but he popularized it and it went mainstream when he wrote the book, right, The Origin of Species. And the basis of this is that all things come from one common thing. And that's called common ancestry, right? And so anything from moss to human beings, whatever, a long process took place that took millions and billions of years, and from one celled organism that became alive, and no one knows how. And I'll come back to that in a second, but a gradual trend that into bigger things and then more intelligent as we go on. And so that's how we've arrived here with horses and cats and dogs and human beings and so on and so forth. There's three basic aspects of evolution. The first one, again, from Charles Darwin, the first one is the thing called common ancestry. So it's not just one species, but one species that over time turns into other species, et cetera, et cetera. So an amoeba becomes a fish, moves on to an amphibian, moves to a reptile, and then moves on to a mammal. That's how everything came about and evolved over time. Common ancestry came from one place. The second part of evolution is that all living matter came from non-living matter. So, right, the thought is that there was this amoeba in a pool, and there was some energy and kind of lightning, and somehow sparked life. And then life mutated and multiplied, and it slowly evolved into what we see today. The third part is natural selection, right? You've heard of this, we like to refer to it as, right, survival of the fittest. So we as human beings today, most of us, I know my mother-in-law cut off half of one of hers, but we're five-fingered. We have 5 fingers on one hand, 5 fingers on the other. So my mother-in-law has 9.5. You're welcome. That was free of charge. But anyways, so we're 5-fingered mammals, and we are able to kill off things that are 4-fingered, or maybe, 4-fingered creatures can't peel fruit as well as we can, and so, right, the stronger genes were able to survive longer and move forward, and so that's natural selection. So the question is, how can these two viewpoints, creation and evolution, can these two views be compatible? And I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to explain that there are 3 different viewpoints about this particular topic. The first camp, I will call it, the first viewpoint is they would say that both creation and evolution are 100% compatible. Now, there's a guy named Francis Collins who is and was in charge of the Human Genome Project. What is that? It's where they mapped out the human genome. Francis Collins has been the director of National Institutes of Health under President Obama, Trump, and now Biden. He served at the University of Michigan for years, a very long time. Francis Collins was an atheist and has now become a Christian. He read a book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. So if you're an atheist or maybe agnostic in the room and you're a big thinker, look, check it out. Like, go read Mere Christianity, and it's a phenomenal book. Way smarter people than I can get a lot of stuff from that book. So anyways, but Francis Collins, he speaks all over the world about the human genome and evolution, and then he'll pull out in his lectures and in these contexts, he'll pull out his guitar because he's a rocker, and he'll worship God, and he gives his testimony. And people in this study of evolution and these lectures on the Human Genome Project, they become followers of Jesus because of what Francis Collins is doing. And he says that the Bible and creation doesn't dismiss evolution as we saw it in Genesis 2. So God takes material from the earth, right? He said dust, so non-living matter. He creates humankind out of the dust, just like evolution says that non-living matter became living matter. But he suggests that some of the Bible is poetic in nature, and so we don't need to look at the Bible as completely literal in certain circumstances. Like in the book of Genesis, it's giving us this 30,000-foot view that God, like who he is and who humankind is and so on. And he would state that there was not a literal Adam and Eve. But we're, as human beings, we are connected to animals, which isn't a bad thing. Listen to me, all throughout Christian history, Christians have agreed that we are an evolved, rational animal. Like way back to Aristotle. Like we've always said, hey, we're a part of the kingdom Animalia. We mate, we produce, we survive, we go in clans, we connect with each other. That's not a problem because the bodily frame of a human is derived from other creatures, right? This is this camp. And it's never been an issue. Like God creates animals and then says, let's make man in our image. So God creates a person, and then he puts his morality in that person, in us, makes him a spiritual being. That's what it means to be made in God's image. So let me explain that a little bit further. God is not 6 foot and Caucasian. Like think about that for a second. God is not you and you. Like he's not taking on your physical form. That's not what being made in the image of God is. So this position would say, man, it doesn't matter whether we started with 4 toes or 4 fingers, developed into 5 later. It says that we carry the iconos or the imago Dei, the image of God. And we're exploring a bunch of ideas here today, right? And here's one of them. 65 million years ago, something is said that a massive meteor hit the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico and wiped out all of the dinosaurs. 65 million years ago, dinos go down, and mammals are then able to survive. So because of that, we become the apex predator on the earth only because dinos are wiped out. So mammals, right, they grow with immense intelligence and start to do amazing things in agriculture and metal production and technology and start loving each other. Man, we paint, we do mathematics, some of us, not me. All of that comes about because the dinosaurs were wiped out. And so if the dinosaurs didn't get wiped out, now of course we know that we've moved from Homo erectus to Homo sapien. We go from erect man to thinking man. So if dinosaurs didn't get taken out, the thinking man might not have gone to mammals. It could have gone to reptiles. So we think, oh my gosh, if that were the case, we'd be all of these reptilian people walking around doing math and gardening and, and scaly and making sculptures. And so in this viewpoint, it doesn't matter what form we actually look like physically. The main evolutionary theistic mind isn't looking at this saying that we look like God physically. It's that we are stamped with the ikonos, the imago Dei, that we are spiritual, moral beings that God breathed life into. So this idea is that we become distinct from the animals morally, intelligently, consciously. We're self-aware. Animals, right? They gather in groups and they just procreate. Like the males will just walk around, bam, female, boom, another one pops out. Like they don't always date, right? In all these circumstances, we've studied this. But we don't do that, right? Like a man can't say, hey, I'm just gonna go hang out with these college co-eds. I'm single, you're single, let's do this. Bam. No. That's called rape. It doesn't work that way, right? And so this is one of the social breakdowns of social Darwinism. Like a man who is not good looking can only continue his lineage, right, by forcing himself on someone. And that's okay because, it's just a part of the natural history through coding that's happened through animalistic instinct. No. Like there's been a moment where we understand, because we're moral creatures, that human beings can't kill another human. Like a lion can go out and attack an antelope and destroy it, and we can man, that was awesome, and get excited about it, and nobody's calling 911, but we are very different. Like, we're unique. And so this view, this camp would say that the creation story, it's not literal. You don't need to push the biblical creation story found in Genesis literally, because it's intense. It wasn't intended to be a science textbook. So of course, Christians, we understand this. Like, there is poetic nature in this story. John Calvin, a famous theologian, stated that the Holy Spirit of God, when he wrote the book, wasn't concerned with astronomy and how it all lined up. No. When he wrote the Bible, the point of this view is to not naturalists and atheists take over evolution and just hijack it from what the creation story can say. The problem is not Darwinism. Let me tell you that. The problem is not Darwinism. It's the atheistic version of it. And we're trying to take back some of this and show that they can work together. This is what that camp is saying. And even at the end of Darwin's Origins of Species, he said this. Let's check it out. He said, there is a grandeur in this view of life that he was studying, with several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator. This is Darwin. It didn't just, in Darwin's opinion, it didn't just start out of nothing. It was breathed into by the Creator into a few forms, into one. And this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed laws of gravity from so simple a beginning. Endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. And so you got to understand that, man, there's maybe some atheism that's trying to just dismiss God in this whole story, but that wasn't Darwin's goal. And so this idea of evolution is and some of the pushback with creation and evolution, this is where it's coming from. And so Darwin is stating that all of this started, he thought, from a creator, an intelligent being. I'm going to explain some of the problems with this in a few moments. But that's the first group. That's the first camp and how they see it. The second group is Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are over here, and evolution are never compatible. Like there's never going to be any, they're never going to come together. So this camp believes that Adam and Eve are real people. The Bible is literal in every single context, that there are 24-hour period days, and that God in the creation story said that God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And so scientifically, if you take it literally, it means that the world, the earth, is somewhere in between 10,000 and 6,000 years old. And so, of course, when we dig up dinosaur bones a couple hundred years ago, like, this viewpoint kind of became a problem. And so how do you explain that dinosaurs are walking around with Adam and Eve in a literal 24-hour period? Like how does that happen? And some might say, some people in this camp might say, well, Satan, the enemy of our souls, put dinosaur bones in there just to mess with us and to get people to argue and fight and whatever. Others might say, like it's literally not possible for humankind and dinosaurs to walk the earth together. Like, it's not the Flintstones, y'all. This would be problematic. Listen, Flintstones is not a documentary, right? And so one of the problems with literalism of the Bible in this case, in this context, is it doesn't take into account that the Bible is written in different genres. Like the Bible and the books of it are written in different genres of writing. The Bible says that God wraps us up in his wings. But of course, I don't think anyone has ever thought God is a bird. Like, I don't think we've thought that. And so there's this imagery, there's this poetic nature where we're seeing this play out. And so we don't give the Bible sometimes in this viewpoint, literalism, some poetic license. Like, historically speaking, if we read the books of Job, Isaiah, Psalms, and Proverbs, it talks about the four corners of the earth. So if we see that in Scripture, then of course, no wonder people thought the world was flat. So depending on the genre of the book that you're reading in the Bible, we need to be careful on how literal we're trying to force it to be. That's the second group. The third group, and I think this one, in my opinion, this is one of the most plausible groups, and that is that the truth is probably found in between these ideas. And so critique of the first view is this camp would say that Adam and Eve are literal people. They're actual people. Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are real, but they shouldn't necessarily be pressed for scientific detail, because that wasn't the goal of the writing of it. This position takes the Bible serious. It takes science serious, and it accepts most scientific findings if they're legitimate. And the Bible isn't pressing us to be literal in certain circumstances, again, when it comes to scientific fact, but it has a poetic nature at times. For example, let's go back to Genesis 1. Genesis 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And then it says, watch this, "The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." Well, you see, if we're going to take this completely literal, and if we're going to try to force this into becoming a scientific textbook, the problem is that we see that God said, "Let there be light" in day one, but the sun, the moon, and the stars that give us light aren't created until day 4. Now, theologians will argue that even in the end times, when we go to heaven, that heaven doesn't even have a sun, moon, and stars. It's just lit by the presence of God. That theologians say that God is light. Again, we're going into scientific research here. So think about this, how do we have light without the sun, the moon, and the stars in the creative narrative? if in day one there's light, but it isn't until day 4 that all of that is created. Like how does that work scientifically? And so if Genesis is completely taken literally, plants are made on day 3, but the sun isn't made until day 4, which becomes a problem, right, with photosynthesis and other things. And so there is probably something bigger going on in this text, in the story of Genesis 1 and 2, than it being a literal science textbook. Now Genesis 2, right? Everything was made according to its kind. Now, of course, evolution theories, we have this same thing in mind, that everything evolved over time, microevolution. But macroevolution, scientifically, macroevolution would say like a tree could become an animal, or a spider could become a crocodile, and no. Like hundreds of years later, macroevolution has been scientifically debunked. We've never seen that happen. But a day, you got to understand some things. A day, when the Bible says day in the Hebrew, when it says God did this in a day, when we take that literal 24-hour day, it doesn't give room, right, for the billions and billions of years that we've now seen scientifically. And so the problem with the thought that the day is that day 1, God created light, is a literal 24-hour day period, is that the Hebrew word yom that we see here for day, it can also mean and be translated into epoch or era. So that can be an enormous amount of time that something takes place in. So this is why in Genesis 2:5 it says like no shrubs or trees that are planted appeared yet because God hadn't sent rain. So this detail in Scripture makes us wonder, okay, well, a plant can survive one day without rain, but it's interesting that God gives us this detail that it hadn't appeared yet because of no rain. And so it must have been an extended period of time and not just a 24-hour period. Genesis 2 suggests that Adam and Eve were created on separate days, but in the same era, in the same epoch. First thing God does is God, when he creates Adam, he puts Adam to work. He says, you're going to till the ground, you're going to make this garden amazing and immaculate, and he gives Adam the job of naming all of the animals. That sounds exhausting. And it honestly, it sounds like it would probably take more than 24 hours. You know what I'm saying? Like, to name all of the animals, wow. So Genesis 5, right, they were created on the same Yom day, which could mean, again, era or epoch. So this explanation, it kind of saves Christians in the Bible thinking that it can be poetic in nature and it doesn't have to be taken literally. It kind of saves us from some of these contradictions that might be lurking there. Genesis 1, right? Plants were made before human beings. Genesis 2, Adam and Eve were made before plants. So how does that work when it's being said that way, unless there's an era beyond the 24-hour period? So there's poetic license to this story. And let us kind of back up the train for a little bit too and explain some of the Hebrew culture that's weaved into this. So you got to understand when and how the Bible was written. The Bible, in this particular story, this was passed down from generations and generations and generations of people verbally long before it was ever written on paper. They would sit around in campfires and in community with each other, and they would share this story as a song, and they would share it poetically. And this has less to do with literal science detail and astronomy, but more to do with community amongst each other in the midst of, because these people, God's people, were sharing all these stories in the midst of exile from the Babylonians and from the Assyrians and the Egyptians. And honestly, it set a rhythm for their lives together and their community together, and even the idea of working 6 days, and on the 7th day, they rested. It became a rhythm for their life. But here's what happens in the days of creation. Check this out. Day 1, 2, and 3, God forms everything. He forms light, he forms water and the land and everything in it. And then the second part is filling. On day 4, he creates and forms, day 1, 2, and 3. And then on day 4, 5, and 6, he fills. He forms and then he fills. He forms and then he fills. And so we don't need we don't need a literal 24-hour day period for all of this to take place. And so we save ourselves from humans riding around on dinosaurs, etc. And so watch this. Check this out. So Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the second verse, he says the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep of the waters. So follow me in this. If he's saying that the word is formless, that the world and the earth is formless and void, like he created it, it's there, the cosmos is there. He's formed it and he hasn't filled it. So it's possible, listen to me, it's possible that from day 1, when he created all of this, that there is a period, this is the wrong type of marker to be writing on, you can't see it, that there could be a period even before this, or while all this is going on, that could have lasted 1, 2 billion years. Because he forms it and fills it. And so when you look at this story and you think about it from the fact that it's poetic in nature, it wasn't meant to be scientific in detail. Now, of course, we see some scientific detail in it, but there is room for some of this to take place. And so you can't just say, man, we see that all these years have taken place, man, we just need to throw it away. No. God creates, listen, God created everything, ex nihilo, out of nothing. And so it's sitting there, and then he starts to shape it and mold it. And so this position, this camp, it says the Bible here is telling us the what, not necessarily telling us the how, specifically in detail. And so when this was written, actually penned, the Holy Spirit was actually combating through God's people. When this was written, it was subverting and redirecting Babylonian and Assyrian and Egyptian myths about who God is. Because check this out, in those contexts, those people, Assyrians, Babylonians, Egyptians, they worshiped the God of sun, moon, and stars. The god Ra, they would worship them. And so the Hebrew people, God's people, would come along and say, no, the Genesis story is not speaking, right? It's not speaking directly to 2021 scientific minds here to prove itself scientifically. That's not what it's doing. It actually came about. It was written down because they were trying to contradict and come back at, hey, you guys are worshiping these little g gods of the moon, the stars, and the sun, but our God created those. And you're creating something that God created. And so look, there's something bigger and better than even what you're seeing and worshiping. And so listen, Christians, man, we need to be humble with people. We need to have conversations with people. But just Christians, we also, man, can we expect some scientists to be humble as well? Like we need to be humble, and we can't even be lobbing darts at each other. You're wrong, and you're wrong, and you're wrong. And no. Sometimes, like, we can be wrong in certain circumstances and even in certain interpretations of things and not even realize why they exist. So how does humankind fit into all this? Genesis 2:7. Genesis 2:7, I'll get there eventually. Bam, that's not it. I'll just read it. You can take it off. So Genesis 2:7, it says, then the Lord God formed the man, right, from the dust of the ground, and he breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. So man, like science says, could have been put there 2 billion years ago. The question is, what kind of man are we talking about? So go through the science textbooks, and you've got, right, a bunch of different types. You got Homo habilis, skillful man, handyman, Homo erectus, upright man, Homo sapien, which is thinking man. And so you have erect man into thinking man. Please don't tweet that, all right? Anyways, moving forward, some of you will get that one later. The last group coming 50 to 100,000 years ago, but this camp would say that the biblical text is saying that at some point, Homo erectus, like God breathed into his nostrils and a spiritual creature, a moral creature, a thinking creature, a creature that can understand a relationship with each other and a relationship with God came into being. So they transitioned into beings with souls. So it makes it compatible with scientific understanding. The question is, were some Homo erectus walking around without souls? One conservative writer wrote this. He said, there is much agreement between the biblical and scientific date on the age of the first true human sapiens. That is true humans who lived in villages and practiced agriculture. Scientists generally date the origin of such species to less than 10,000 years, even as they date other human-like beings much older. Furthermore, their studies are now concluding that there was a first human female, mitochondrial Eve, a real person, and as a first human male, Y chromosomal Adam. And these are genetically unconnected to other Homo species, such as, wait, did I say not? Oh, they're unconnected to Homo species such as Homo erectus. And so we see this, Adam and Eve, right? They have Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, and he's kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And in the picture, in the scriptures, Cain is actually afraid to leave the garden. Why is he afraid? Because there's other things out there that can kill him. Just to give you an idea of some thoughts that are in this particular camp. But the point is, people look at the creation story and question whether billions of years can be added to it. So ask yourself this question. How many times have you seen God move quickly? Let me put it another way. Sanctification, which is a big Christian a term, a big word that means that once we're saved by God, by Christ, we begin to follow him, we begin to learn his ways, and we ask him to change us to become more like him. We change to become more like him. Now, how many of you has it been your experience that you've given your life to Christ, you've received his salvation, and then bam, you're perfectly like him? That's not my story. Like there's this process of becoming more like him, letting him do some work. And so it's not, so the point isn't how quickly does God work, but it's this awe and this amazingness to who he is and how powerful and big and incredible he is. Hey, guys, I know you worship the gods of the stars, the moon, and the sun, but look, there's a greater God that even created those. And he's created everything. Now, who here needs a nap? Because I do, I'm exhausted, and I want my mama. But we're going to continue. Next week, we're going to talk about this question. If God is in control, why does he allow evil? We're going to go back to that. But before we finish this one, when it comes to evolution, man, a lot has changed recently with the classic understanding that took place 200 years ago when Darwin came up with so much of the stuff. With modern DNA testing, man, a lot of things have shifted. But modern secular culture has accepted an idea that was proposed all those years ago without allowing some pushback on it. And so today, before we close, I'm going to push back a little bit on that idea. First, most evolutionary thought is more of a philosophy than it is actually a science. And so there's two things that are going on right here, right? There's two causes for everything that we're talking about. There's either an intelligent design or a natural happening. And natural or Darwinian thought typically starts by ruling out intelligent design. Like before we even have this conversation, before we even jump into looking at the facts, the natural Darwinian thought process, evolutionists or atheists specifically, they'll just say, nope, God doesn't exist. We're not going to start there. We're going to start here. And can I just tell you, that's like fixing the game. So think about it this way. I'm a detective, and I'm going in with my detective buddies, and there's a crime scene that we're going to go take a look at. And we get to the crime scene and we're like, okay, we're going to huddle up. Before we do anything, we got to understand, we got to get all the facts. We got to get all the evidence. We got to see everything laid out. So we're going to be meticulous to make sure we see everything. But let's all agree that the husband didn't do it. Like that's, so again, this, by starting with the idea that no, God's not even going to be in the equation, if you remove that possibility before you even go there, you see what I'm saying? And so it's not necessarily all fact. It's a philosophy. And this is exactly what a naturalistic evolution has done. We've ruled out, before we even start the conversation, any intelligent design to this. So we got to find like a purely materialistic, naturalistic explanation for things. And so I want to suggest, please, have some humility in this question to maybe consider the intelligent design, to consider God in this equation. Stephen Jay Gould, who was a Harvard evolutionary guy, he was an atheist, paleontologist, said that there's some non-overlapping mysteria, and he says that we can't make comment about God because we're doing the work of just science and physics, and it doesn't immediately conclude anything about God, and so we can't really speak to it, especially to his non-existence, so we can't even comment about it. And Einstein said that science, in setting up goals and passing statements of value into culture, is not the domain of science. Like physics can't comment on metaphysics or the spiritual. And so this is where we've both got to be humble in this conversation. And so before we go, I want to talk about 3 shortcomings that people have raised of the classical evolutionary theory. The first is the question of the origin of life. Like they know this. Finding the origin of life is like the thorn in an evolutionist's side. Like if life began with like an amoeba and then it evolved over time into something else, well, where did that amoeba come from? And this has never been observed. So we just need to take that as kind of a false position. And people have tried to create this scenario. There's a famous experiment called the miracle experiment. You can Google it. Go take a look at it. Where evolutionists took methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and they tried to create an environment similar to what they believed was where life began. So they created this environment, and everyone was like, yeah, great job, this is going to be awesome, we're going to disprove God, it's going to be the best thing ever. And then NASA comes along, and their scientists that came on and said, hold on, you've got a closed environment here, and you scientists have an intelligent mind that are creating this experiment, and so you're debunking your own natural, it just came out of nothing idea, because you're the ones running the show with your intelligent minds. And so that became problematic. We also see, NASA pointed out, that at the beginning of the earth, there was only water, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. And in this experiment, they used methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, and so this experiment became a complete failure. One doctor says this, Dr. Bradley says, more than 50 years of experimentation on the origins of life in the fields of chemical and molecular evolution have led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth rather than its solution. At present, all discussion on principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance, which is exactly what happened with the Miller experiment. Francis Crick said this, an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. Interesting language. So many are the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. Every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I say I will never write another one again because there is too much speculation. And so you got to realize that this is not scientific data and proof, it's philosophy. And even the experts in it are saying that. Even Darwin, who was doing observational science. He had bones and turtles and birds, right? And it was before DNA. But listen, once DNA came into picture, man, we've been able to look at microscopes and see that even within the human cell, there are 300 million sets of letters. Like DNA is the literal language that has an intelligent mind to it, seemingly behind it, because it's a language. And if you were to leave here today and you were to see someone right in the sky, like, I love you, Mom, with a plane, you'd probably say, like, an intelligent mind crafted that because it's a competent language and you can comprehend it with letters and so on. That is what DNA is. When we found DNA and began to see it was a language that mapped out everything, we began to see that something extraordinarily intelligent had to be behind it all. And so the assumption of evolutionary thinking is that matter over time creates mind. And that, of course, is a logical problem, because every situation that we've seen is that mind creates matter. And so the reality is this. A guy named Anthony Flew, who was back in the 80s and 90s, Anthony Flew used to be one of the biggest atheists. Man, he would debate Christians. He'd just seek them out, and he'd try to find them and rip them apart on stage. And in 2010, right before Anthony Flew died, he at least became an agnostic, if not a theist, that we talked about last week. Because part of his problem with his longtime thinking was this. Anthony Flew said this: the enormous complexity of even the simplest self-producing cell, with no better explanation of a first cause, people overlook the fact that Darwin himself, in chapter 14 of On the Origin of Species, pointed out that his whole argument began with a being which already possessed reproductive powers, a creature that evolution must give some account for. Darwin knew that he hadn't given account, and now it seems to be that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. An atheist, a scholar, a scientist coming to the point saying, man, we don't have the full proof and the facts, and so, man, we got to be humble and maybe think, man, there could be something more to this. And so that's the point. We know, right, that there is microevolution within species, but there's never been a documentation without failing later is this evolutionary example of something jumping species. Like you might give bacteria antibiotics, but it didn't become another organism. It didn't become another species. No, it stayed bacteria. You have dog breeders, but they all remain dogs. They don't evolve into horses. It's never happened in the history of scientific thought. We've studied it, and it's shown that a single-celled organism is more complex than anything we've ever been able to create, even the supercomputer. Not even close to as complex. And this organism, this single-celled organism, right? They have coding systems and artificial languages, factories to reproduce themselves, and they've got proofreading, for crying out loud. I need one of those. I say that all to say that the complexity of creation always, listen to me, always points to a creator. Like, that's the point. And it doesn't point to a nothing. It doesn't point to we're alone on the universe. If you eliminate God, then what you are going to come up with, the only thing you can come up with is panspermia and aliens, and the reason there's life, the reason there's a language and coding in DNA isn't because there's a God, it's because there's aliens. And people have published books about this and papers. You see the movie Prometheus, like that's the idea. It's called panspermia. Make sure you have the right spelling when you Google panspermia, okay? Because that could cause a problem. But so that's what we jump to. We're like, okay, if we can't figure out what came before us and whatever, it's got to be aliens. Aliens created life because there's no better explanation. But of course, this is a stupid answer because who created the aliens? And all we do is just kick the can a bit further down the road to conclusion, but all of this intelligence, complexity pushes us, maybe even forces us to recognize that there was an intelligent mind creator. And Darwin himself said this: if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modification, my theory would absolutely break down. And that's what we've seen. And so now we know of many organs and systems and processes in life that fit that exact description. And that's why people cause questions about it. Now, the second issue, the last one I'll share before praying for us, is the fossil record. The fossil record, man, you have to understand that if the theory of evolution is true as it lays right now, then what you would see are millions and millions of examples of transitioning fossils. Like if you've seen the movie The Croods, they're all walking around and there's this like half-calf turtle and his eyes are all messed up, popping out. You're going to go watch that movie today, I know it, because you have to have animals, right, in transitional form. But of course, as we have all of the fossil records and we've been searching through this for 300 years, there is literally zero example of half-evolved species in the rock bed which would have had to have happened. As you look at all the different layers and epochs and eras, you'd think that you would begin to see of some of these transitional models, but there aren't any. And Darwin himself, again, he said this: why then is not even geological formations in every stratum full of such intermediate links? There isn't any. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. And so the idea is people look at it and they see evolution as a problem. Stephen Jay Gould, again, evolutionist, atheist, he said this: the history of most fossil species includes two features particularly inconsistent with evolution. They exhibit no directional change, and species does not arise gradually by the steady transformation of its ancestors, and it appears all at once and fully formed. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that are in our textbooks as kids have data only at the tips of their branches. The rest is inference. It's a philosophy. It's not proof, however reasonable, not the evidence. And so the reality is this camp is not even following evidence anymore. It's all inference because we don't know. And we haven't seen it. And it must be this way, which is, again, it's a faith position. You're even taking a faith position towards it. It's a religious position. It's not a position that's based on evidence and data. Go look at the Cambrian explosion that happened 500 years ago, which is why people raise this question. You have this explosion of animal phyla, which is why they're all in the rock bed fully formed. There's no transitional models. And so Darwin said this as to why we didn't find records of these primordial periods. I can give no satisfactory answer. And then he said this: to the question why we do not find records of these primordial periods, I can give no satisfactory answer. The case at present must remain inexplicable and may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views here entertained. And so all of that with this. The other massive problem with purely naturalistic evolutionary theory, this philosophy doesn't work, is because of your mind. Because of your mind. And everything that you believe is a product of evolution, which means it's a product of something that's helped you to survive, not necessarily hooked up with reality, not necessarily something that is true. The problem is that means that our cognitive faculties believes things that aren't necessarily true. They just believe things that helped us to survive. And so, well, if that is then true about our existence, true about evolutionary theory, also Darwin himself says this: within me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of a man